of four critical thinkers. Every time we do one of these shows, we always define what for critical thinking is all about. What is critical thinking? It's simply the objective analysis and evaluation of any issue. We're going to go through a number of issues today in order to form a judgment, an opinion. It doesn't require that you're 100% factual on this sort of a thing. You have as many facts as you have available to you in order to make these sorts of decisions. And of course, if additional facts become apparent to you down the road, then perhaps you'll change your position. But the critical thinker tries to be objective, tries to analyze and evaluate the facts of an issue, and then makes a judgment, and that's what we're going to try to do. A couple of things we're going to apply it to today. COVID-19. I think that the American people are literally at the breaking point with respect to this now. They have heard the plus and the minus, the up and the down, the truth and the falsity, and all kinds of things in between. And most Americans are not so sure they can trust what they're hearing any longer, but they do know this. They're sick and tired of being locked up, locked down, kids home from school, not being able to live their lives as they are expecting to live them normally. And they're now becoming a lot more aware of the fact that the real threat of COVID-19 isn't as large. It has been played up in the press or even in the medical community. And so they've had it up to here with respect to this process. Just a day or so ago, the Los Angeles city mayor, Eric Garcetti, has issued yet a new stay-at-home order. And he says that it's time to lock down and cancel everything. And he's shocked 2 days since that order was issued that people are pushing back, saying, no, this time, no, we're not going to play the game any longer. There has been misguided lockdown policy for a long, long time in a lot of cities and states in this country, unsupported by the science, I might add. They always tell us, oh, no, we're doing this for your own good, and the science says we need to do this, but the science doesn't say we need to do this. And therefore, we have these nagging doubts about whether it's being done for our own good, so to speak. They have pushed U.S. small businesses literally to the brink of extinction. Stop and think about this. In October, over 13,000 epidemiologists, public health scientists, health practitioners, healthcare people in the industry from all over the world, not just here in the United States, signed a petition. You probably didn't even hear about this, but they signed a petition that calls for lockdowns to come to an end. They signed the petition saying in the supporting documentation that lockdowns never did work, haven't worked, and still won't work. That's not the solution. They want a return to normal practices in the communities that they represent, citing the physical and the mental health issues associated with the lockdowns and the fact that essentially the cure is much worse than the problem to begin with. And then just about 2 or 3 weeks after that, the World Health Organization basically echoed the call for lockdowns to come to an end as well, saying that it just isn't a workable process. So what are we going to do about this? When are we going to come to our senses and realize that this hasn't worked, doesn't work, and we don't need to have to do this any longer? Arbitrary closure orders. Stop and think of what's been going on. You've seen it in the news all across the country. We're shutting down this business, that industry, whatever the case happens to be. This is the lifeblood of the business owners, the business's employees. And if they can't work and if they can't earn an income and there are no other options, sure, unemployment compensation is available, but it's limited in terms of how much you get and how long you get it. And so as a result, you have people who are, in fact, just before Christmas, going to go off unemployment in the tens of millions of Americans across the country. What a cruel thing to do this time of the year especially. But the bottom line is they don't have any money. If they don't have any money, then you can understand what the repercussions are going to be. They cannot pay their mortgages. They cannot pay their rent. they cannot pay tuition for. A college, if they have a college-age student that's attending, they can't pay their bills, they can't pay their car payments, and we're going to have what just amounts to a chain reaction catastrophe in this country. It's been happening on a limited basis already, but it's going to happen on an explosive basis. This just doesn't work. I mean, how can you, if you're a business owner, feel as though somebody's looking out for you, somebody's helping you in some way, somebody cares about your plight, if you're ordered to close your business, wherein other businesses of same or similar size and scope are allowed to stay open? For example, gymnasiums. They're shutting down gymnasiums all over the country on the theory that gymnasiums somehow or other are a health hazard. And yet at the same time, and they're doing this with the science, of course. Oh, yes, the science says. The truth of it is that gymnasiums are seldom ever found to have contributed in any way a single case of COVID. And yet they get shut down. Well, at the same time, dance studios in the same community remain open. Now go figure. What's the thinking here? How is that sensible? How is that reasonable public policy? Big box stores are allowed to stay open. Your Walmarts, your Home Depots, your Lowe's, and all that sort of thing. And we want them to remain open. We need them to remain open. But local retailers, small businesses, who in many cases are selling the same products and services as the big box stores, they're told, nope, sorry, we have to shut you down. What's the reasoning behind it? Oh, it's the science, the science. If it's the science, then you know full well that the science has to do with numbers, has to do with the number of individuals who may be found in a venue. A whole lot more are going to be found at a Walmart than are going to be found at Joe's hardware store. But the bottom line is Joe's is the one who pays the price, not Walmart. What's the fairness in that? How is that an equitable process? You have restaurants and bars. Literally, this is happening in the city of New York. You have certain zones, red, yellow, orange zones that are supposedly related to the amount of COVID outbreak that occurs. And you have restaurants blocks from each other, just a few blocks from each other. Your restaurant, your bar gets shut down. Happened on Staten Island just last night. Yours is shut down just across the railroad tracks. Close enough to throw a rock and hit the windows, there's a bar or restaurant that remains open. Really? The railroad tracks somehow or other present a barrier to COVID? Is that real science, or is that just arbitrary and capricious government overstepping? You've got people who are ordered to close, and there's no appeal or recourse here. And worse, in the process of planning this, we don't have any evidence that the businesses themselves were consulted by the government people before the decisions were made to determine just exactly what kind of consequences the policy might have. We're going to just shut it down and let the chips fall where they may. Well, that's asinine. That's ridiculous. And Americans have had it up to here with that kind of policy thinking on the part of government. And I might add something. The vast majority of the governors and the mayors who are sticking it to small business in America are Democrats, blue states, blue cities, traditional Democratic venues. Why isn't it happening elsewhere? Why is Florida, for example, not suffering any worse than any other state is with respect to COVID-19, but remains open and operational? South Dakota, and many other states. Those are red states. And the red states somehow or other don't seem to get COVID like the blue states do. I don't know what that says about the blue states or the communities in those blue states, but I do know this. The policy is harsh, it's capricious, it's arbitrary, and eventually it's going to have to come to an end because it is not sustainable. It is not sustainable as a practical matter. It is not sustainable as an economic matter. And it is certainly not sustainable as a constitutional matter. No appeal, none. Where do you go Where do you say, all right, Mr. Mayor, but I have to remain open. Here's why. This is what the consequence is going to be. This is the pain and suffering that will be caused, much greater than the pain and suffering that anyone could expect to suffer if they had to do business with me or if I remained open. Where do I go to appeal this? And the answer is, get away, go away. You've heard me. It's done. 50%, up to 50% in some states, 30% in most states, of small business owners are saying now that if this continues to the end of the year, their businesses will never reopen. Never reopen. Consider that 8 out of 10 jobs in most communities in America rely on small business. It's not the big box stores. It's not the great big corporations, the Fortune 500s that hire people. It is the very small businesses, the mom and pop operations with 1 or 2 or 5 or 7 or 10, or maybe 100, 150 employees. But those folks have to shut down. And if they do, the local economy is going to hell in a handbasket. There isn't money to underwrite public works and public projects and even public utilities and public services in cities and counties anymore as a result of the fact that nobody's making a paycheck. In those communities, if no one's making a paycheck, they can't pay taxes. They can't pay their mortgages or their rent either, but they can't pay taxes. And you have cities that are seeing, wow, our budgets are shrinking. What are we going to do? And what is their answer? Their answer isn't, let's figure out how to get people back to work and get money flowing again in this community. Their answer is, let's raise taxes on them. A typical Democrat point of view, by the way, but let's raise taxes on them. And so somehow or other that's going to fix it all. Can't squeeze blood from a turnip. Don't they know that? Do they not know that? And then to me, what is most troubling, deeply troubling about these executive mandates that order businesses to shut down on the theory that they're going to be able to then somehow or other contribute to the greater public good health-wise, is that there is no legislative involvement in these processes. Have you noticed this? You've got governors, you've got mayors, and they're the ones that are declaring these sorts of draconian mandates, but you never have any representation in the process. Legislatures, and many times we're talking about executive orders. We're not talking about enforcing existing law, even existing law when it comes to public health. We're talking about mayors and governors who are basically deciding who the winners and losers are going to be and deciding what justification they're going to use, even if the justification has nothing whatever to do with anything other than junk science. And they are squeezing the life's blood out of a vast number of their own citizens. How can that be the solution to this pandemic? How can that possibly be a rightful, reasonable, conscientious way of dealing with this situation? The stakeholders are getting stuck between the eyes, but they're not being asked, what can we do to help you under these circumstances? How can we do this together? How can we come up with a strategy that will work? Nobody wants to know. They just tell you, shut it down. Shut it down by midnight or we're going to send the sheriff. That is just not the American way. You know that is not the American way. And then to add injury, and insult rather, I should say, to injury, we have the unbelievable, mind-bending hypocrisy of our leaders with respect to how they themselves conduct their lives while all the rest of us have to buckle under the rules. There's a place called the French Laundry. It's a very posh restaurant. I think it's like $300 an entree in Napa County, California. And just recently, the restaurant was the scene of Governor Gavin Newsom's attending an associate's 50th birthday party. This took place a couple of weeks ago. And also at the French Laundry at the time were some of the state's major medical minds, people with the medical association, folks in public health, also at the very same place. They had just issued an order that you could dine outdoors and outdoors only, not indoors. And that if you were indoors, that you would have to wear a mask, and that if you were outdoors, you'd have to wear a mask as well. And that indoors, there's not enough ventilation in there. It was unsafe, so you had to dine outdoors. And what happens? All these high upper crust mucky mucks and associating with the elite in California go to this 50th anniversary or 50th birthday party, should say, at the French Laundry, violating the 3 household per party limit that the governor himself had imposed. And when you see that kind of thing, you think, what? Really? How serious can this be? If they're not going to live by the same rules that they're forcing us to live by, what's the point? This only enrages folks who are beginning to realize, wait a minute, the threat isn't as great as it looks like it's supposed to be. And they're killing me economically. They're killing my children because they can't be in school. And they go off and do these sorts of things. In other words, the rule is, the rules apply to thee and not to me. We saw it also not too long ago when the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, had to get a hair appointment in at a time in which, in San Francisco, salons were ordered to shut down. And so what did she do? She made a private appointment. And then what did she do? She blamed it on the salon owner, as though somehow that woman duped her into doing that. Nancy Pelosi. You look at this kind of a situation, you shake your head, and you wonder, what the hell are they thinking? You had the same or similar situation in Chicago with Mayor Lori Lightfoot released a public service announcement. She told Chicago residents that, getting your roots done is just simply not essential, and so we're not going to allow you to do that. We're shutting down the salons. And then what did she do? She went to a salon. She had to have her hair done. And what was her excuse? I'm a public official. I'm in the public eye. I have to look good. Yeah. Rules apply to thee and not to me. In Los Angeles, the county supervisor, Sheila Cruel, just last week, voted to ban outdoor dining. By her own admission, outdoor dining, according to the science, has absolutely made no contribution to COVID-19 whatsoever. Not a single case of COVID can be traced to any restaurant in LA County that serves food in well-ventilated outdoor settings. Not one. So before it went into effect, what did she do? She went to her favorite Italian restaurant and dined before the shutdown occurred. San Jose Mayor Sam Leoncardo advised the public just before Thanksgiving to steer clear of large Thanksgiving events. Don't go places where a lot of folks whom you haven't been around in a long time are going to be there, whether they be family members or friends or whatever the case happens to be. He ordered it to be obeyed to the citizens of San Jose. And then he went off to Thanksgiving dinner at his parents' house with siblings and friends from all over Southern California and other states as well. You see what I'm getting at? Of course you do. You've seen this in the news. They don't do what they tell you to do, but they're going to destroy you if you do it. You can only put up with that kind of crap so long, and then you have the mentality that took the head off of Marie Antoinette. Right? Went the wrong way, old King Louis. Right? Now the people are revolting because, Louis, you're pretty revolting yourself. That's what people do. They get upset about this. They look at, wait a second here. These people who are elected, who are supposedly looking out for the public health, are supposed to be working for me. And they're not. They're telling me what to do, but they're not doing the same thing. Now you start adding this all together, and This is why I say we're coming to a boiling point. People in the United States are coming to a boiling point. And if you're a critical thinker, you're realizing with objective analysis, looking at all these details, evaluating what this all means, you're coming to at least the conclusion that you can't trust the officials because they don't know what the hell they're doing most of the time. And sometimes they do, but it isn't about health. It may be more about control. Now, you parents, I know that you have long known that your kids should be in school. I know you have. You've long known that your kids should be in school. Dr. Anthony Fauci, this week, finally admitted what all you parents have known for months, that kids are not big spreaders of COVID-19 and that they should be back in school. Now everybody's saying, send your kids back to school. The press, send your kids back to school. Gee, we heard send your kids back to school a few months ago, didn't we? That's when President Trump said, the science indicates that these kids are pretty capable of dealing with this disease and they don't spread it very much. And we have really no scientific reason to not let them continue to attend school. And what happened? The president was vilified. The left went crazy. They went ballistic. The media beat him up over the whole thing. And now Dr. Fauci says, we can send them back to school. And everybody, great, let's send them back to school. It was always thus. Do you know that the World Health Organization, that the task force, the president's task force, that the vast medical community in the United States knew in June that kids shouldn't be kept out of school? They knew that. So why didn't they sell it on a broad base? Why? Politics, an election year. When kids are home around their parents, get rattled, and if the parents get rattled, they look for somebody to blame it on before they cast their ballot in November. And what did they tell them they should do? Blame it on Trump. Blame it on the premature attitudes of Trump with respect to all of this stuff. He doesn't know what he's doing. And guess what? Turns out in the exit polling from the election on the 3rd of November that a lot of that worked, but a lot of that was fake news with an agenda. They were driving an agenda with that, and you got duped. But you knew all along, somehow or other, this isn't right. Somehow or other, it's not right. Parents have been clamoring in all parts of the United States for months now to send their kids back to school. Reopen the schools, the classrooms, and not on these tepid and timid bases where you have them in school for a few hours a day and then they're off for 3 days at home and then back for a few hours. Not that kind of. Put them in school 5 days a week, full school schedule. That's what the health officials all over the world have determined is the best idea, and virtually all of Europe and most other parts of the country, Africa, Asia, Australia, they're back in the classroom. They're just not here. Why? Well, now all of a sudden with the election passed, they might be. That begins to smell of, this isn't about the science. It isn't even about the COVID. It's about the politics. Health issues from being cooped up at home. We know, and medical officials have been telling us now for several months, are serious matters that have to be addressed, notwithstanding the potential threat of COVID. Depression, suicide, youth suicide, substance abuse, child abuse, economic difficulty. These are tough situations, and they're happening inside households all over America. As we come toward the swing of the year after the holiday season, my guess is you're going to see a wholesale reopening of America's classrooms. So why didn't they do it before? Ask yourself, why didn't they do it before? I told you there was a political reason for it. But who was calling the shots here? Was this the science or was this the politics of it? Educators have been reporting now, you've caught this since since the middle of last month, that course failure rates for kids taking classes online, distance learning they call it, are as high as 40% among students across the United States. The students are forced into this distance learning process. Did you know that many kids don't even attend classes that are set up under this circumstance? Why? Because they come from two-parent households where both parents have to work and some of them are away from home for the day, or single-parent households where the parent who is the custodial parent of the child has to work as well, so they can't supervise them and do their job at the same time. They have to make a living. And whether they're themselves at home and working from home or having to go to their work venue, as many of them must, the child is on their own, so to speak, and they just don't show up for classes. It happens an awful lot. And that's a consequence we don't even discuss. Economic hardship occurs as well, as parents have to choose between balancing their careers with supervising and staying at home for at-home learning for their students. This is a situation that places them between a rock and a hard place. I mean, stop and think about it. You know this in your own household. You know this if you have grandkids. This is not easy to do. It's not easy at all to do, and it's very, very painful to have to deal with these sorts of situations because you feel totally helpless. All of this contributes to a public that is seething. You're feeling it. You don't even know where to take your frustration, but you're feeling it. Every time you're told, oh, there's going to be another lockdown, or, oh, gee, there's a spike in cases, and this is, you know what's coming. More difficulty for yourself. Not for them, for you. And I think that has brought us literally to the brink. Consider it. There are a couple of other issues that are starting to change as well. One of them has to do with religious liberty, and we'll get to that when we come back. You're watching For Critical Thinking. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and you can join us, and here's how. If you want to get on the program with us, all you have to do is to contact Vinny, our producer. There's the way you do that. Vinny at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. He will send you a numerical password, and you're in. You got to have, obviously, a microphone and a camera on your Mac or your PC, or you can use your telephone, of course. They're generally equipped with both. And that's how you get on. So if you want to comment or express yourself on this program, I welcome you to do that. And that's how you do it. All right? We're going to take a time out here. And when we come back, there's a lot more.
We believe every person is created in the image of God with immeasurable beauty and worth, that people should not be defined by their present condition or past mistakes. We are all broken. We need each other. Healing for our brokenness begins with connection, with understanding how much we are loved by a good God. And with healing comes change, the potential for joy and meaning. No one was created for mere survival on the streets, for an existence blurred by mind-numbing substances. Each person is created with a purpose, a unique gift no one else can offer the world. Our job is to help them rediscover it. Real people, real change. Union Gospel Mission.
Welcome back to For Critical Thinking. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. If you just joined us, we're talking about the pandemic and the fact that it's taxing us to the limit now as we watch our businesses close, our incomes interrupted, our children home from school not performing well. And we're wondering, wait a minute, is the cure worse than the actual ailment itself? And I think maybe some of us are coming to that conclusion. The science has been known with respect to kids for a long, long time, since last spring. But the media has claimed under pressure from the teachers' unions, and the Democrats have claimed under pressure from the teachers' unions, that they cannot send your kids back to school. You don't have much clout, but teachers' unions have a lot of clout. The National Education Association, local teacher unions in your states, state teacher unions have tremendous political clout, and politicians listen to that. Governors and mayors, they listen to that. But the science does not support this. The teachers who have claimed that they're exposed to too much potential danger are really not exposed to nearly as much danger as they claim. The kids do not spread COVID nearly as much as others do, particularly in the K through 12 range, they do not. And insofar as that's the case, the claim that there's too much risk, even if you're an older teacher, there's too much risk, is really pretty lame. And the science doesn't back them up anymore. They've played the game long enough now. The politics is passed in terms of the election and whatever outcome they were looking for to try to leverage this whole thing to obtain. That's gone behind us now. And so then the question becomes one of, what is your excuse now? And they don't have one, so let's get back. Let's get back to the classroom, and let's do it quickly. Now, what about religious freedom? A lot of the mayors, a lot of the governors have inflicted a tremendous amount of imposition on the constitutional right under the First Amendment for the free exercise of religious expression. The U.S. Supreme Court finally acted to protect religious liberty this week, and it's going to change a lot of things in the weeks to come. The court virtually signaled that if unconstrained religious observances and public safety somehow come to loggerheads, collide, or at odds, it's religious freedom that must prevail. Now, I told you this a long time ago. We've talked about it, and you know it. Religious freedom, religious expression is specifically contained in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The operation of public schools isn't. Closing down businesses isn't. But religion is exempt from government. The start of that First Amendment, 45 words, says Congress shall make no law, and Congress means government, shall make no law abridging the free expression of religion. Now, that ruling in a New York case that shut down restrictions that were set by Governor Andrew Cuomo also sends a warning to governors and executives, mayors and county commissioners and what have you, across the entire United States. The ruling is a warning to them. An evangelical Christian ministry in Pasadena, California, has brought a legal challenge just in the last 48 hours to Governor Newsom's crowd-related constraints on worshipers, and the Supreme Court has weighed in on that one as well. What the court told the combatants in a lawsuit involving that particular organization was that the result will likely be the same as in New York. And so they sent it back to have it considered by the Court of Original Jurisdiction, essentially telling the governor, Newsom, you won't win. That's the beginning of what I think will be a steamrolling of attempts to restrict participation in religious practices. That doesn't mean that they can't tell you got to wear a mask at church. That just simply tells you that they can't tell you can't go to church. It doesn't mean that they can't tell you should social distance when you're at church. You should follow reasonable practices and such. But they can't tell you can't go. That's what they were telling you. That's what they've been telling you. Or only 10% of you could go, or only 25% capacity, or whatever the case may be. That is what they cannot any longer tell you. The court has made it clear that they're not going to support that kind of thing. And they did it subtly in a case involving restriction in the state of New York. But when the Supreme Court makes a decision on an issue, it applies to all 50 states, not just to the state where the case arose from. All 50 states. And so that means that that was a victory for religious worship, which has been under siege by, I want to say well-meaning, but sometimes I think just foolish government edict. So much for COVID. It continues to unfold, but we're at a point where I think most Americans, particularly small business, are going to say with greater numbers and going to defy in greater numbers, hell no, we won't go any longer. We're not going to give up our living. We're not going to starve our children and our families. We're not going to destroy our communities. We'll take our chances as a community. And we're not talking about, I mean, people try to guilt you into that, try to shame you into thinking that somehow or other you're looking out for yourself and trying to pay your bills and trying to meet your obligations in life is a affront to folks who might possibly get sick if you do what you do and keep your business open. I'm afraid that doesn't fly any longer. I'm afraid that doesn't have very much water in it any longer. It hasn't held water from the very beginning. I'm afraid that the bottom line is this: the community is going to have to figure out another way to combat this virus without killing the community economically. You kill the community economically, and you kill everybody. The virus does not kill everybody. In fact, the virus doesn't even kill very many people at all comparatively. We have almost 3.5 million in the United States, and this 300 million, almost 400 million people in the United States at the present time. And we're still at a less than 2% percentage of COVID survival at almost 98%. So, you start to weigh the numbers, you start to weigh the signs, you start to listen to what used to sound like it made a whole lot of sense, and you come to the conclusion, you know what? That's just not flying anymore. Going to have to come up with something better than that. Especially when we don't really know how many people have died of COVID. We know a lot of people have died with COVID, but not necessarily of COVID. And when they don't tell you what those real numbers are, you might have cause to doubt them. One last thing. Hydroxychloroquine, when taken with zinc, has been around the world a lifesaver for tens of millions of people. Why isn't it a lifesaver here? It's being, by the way, prescribed here by doctors. There are some communities that allow it. CDC has downplayed it. The press has downplayed it. But the truth is, hydroxychloroquine still remains a very, very powerful therapeutic. So why was it dissed so deeply by the press and by politicians? Maybe because Donald Trump promoted it. Maybe that was it. Stop and think about it. When he started stepping up and saying that's a good thing, it'll work, we should do all the things we can, all the possible therapeutics we could use, all of a sudden everybody was against it. But physicians, practitioners who actually have been prescribing this for their patients early enough in the cycle of the virus, in the treatment of the virus, they have managed to bring almost 100% of their people out of the harm's way associated with coronavirus, and they see no reason as to why that medication was so strongly opposed. But there is one thing. It's cheap, dirt cheap. It's been dirt cheap for years, been around since just after World War II. It's safe. You can't make any money selling hydroxychloroquine. You can make an awful lot of money selling other types of drugs. And Big Pharma, just like teachers' unions, has a huge amount of clout in Washington, D.C. Consider that. I'm simply pointing these things out to you. You can accept or reject as you want to, but the bottom line is I'm pointing them out to you simply because if you're going to be an objective analyst of these issues, you need to know the facts and understand that just because they say the science suggests that or it's for your own good doesn't necessarily mean that any of that's true. The other day I was watching the 10 o'clock news, and there was a piece on the efforts on the part of the Trump campaign to get into court to challenge the results of the vote in several of these states, the swing states particularly. And the anchor, who is not a lawyer, in fact, I've been watching her for several years, and she's not that sharp to begin with on any subject. But she made the statement and it was in the copy, I presume, that he was pursuing his baseless claims. I've seen that baseless claims line from the Associated Press, in a variety of newspapers, on networks, and what have you. This is a talking point. This is not about news. And once again, I came to the conclusion, look, one of the things we've got to take care of in this 21st century is to clean up the fourth estate, clean up the media, because they're way over the line and they're not coming back on their own. The only way they're going to behave is if they're made to behave. And that's our job as consumers of news and information. But that got me thinking about this whole post-election challenge issue. Legislative election fraud hearings are underway. Did you know that? There was one that took place in Michigan just last night. There was another that just wound up a couple of hours ago in the state of Nevada. They're being conducted in Wisconsin, in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and as I mentioned, Michigan, Nevada. And substantial evidence of fraud, substantial evidence even of criminal activity is being presented. That is not baseless. That is evidence. And that evidence comes in the form of sworn affidavits. When you swear out an affidavit, by the way, did you know this? If you swear, make a statement, that's what an affidavit is. It's a statement by an individual who is a witness. And you sign at the bottom of that statement that this information is true under the penalties of perjury. So in other words, you're swearing that it is true, that what the information you're providing is true under penalty of perjury, which means you could go to jail if you're lying. And there are documents, and there are photos, and there are videos, and there is witness testimony from literally now hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were in the vote counting process in one capacity or another in those 6 or 7 swing states, who are on record saying they saw things that were not just unconventional, but that were illegal. These claims are not baseless. Now, you can't just have an allegation. You also have to have proof associated with that allegation. I can't say Joe shot John and say I saw it unless we're able to provide other evidence that John was shot at all and that Joe was the shooter. My word is not the same thing as fact. It's my testimony. That's why we have cross-examination of witnesses. But we're being led to believe that there's absolutely no substance whatsoever under any circumstances that election that took place on the 3rd of November was as clean as a fresh blanket of snow. And it wasn't. It clearly wasn't. I spent a number of hours watching testimony, watching evidence presentation before legislatures, legislative oversight committees this past week, watching them live. Took a lot of notes in my mind about what kinds of things were being said, and there were uniform things being said in this state, that state. There were commonalities that occurred. I mean, what do you do with the testimony of a truck driver who was ordered to drive, as a contractor for the Postal Service, ordered to drive his truck from New York to Pennsylvania with boxes that contained ballots, he estimated to be as many as 100,000 ballots. This guy, by the way, makes postal deliveries from this same New York port to this same Pennsylvania port on a regular basis. And on this particular day, the day after the election, everything was done differently. And when he came to pick up his trailer to leave and go home, it was gone. And nobody seemed to be too concerned about it, too upset about it. What do you do with people who saw huge boxes containing 500 to 1,000 ballots each, stacks and stacks of these, coming in through the back door of election counting, ballot counting centers in Wayne County, Detroit, in Philadelphia, in Atlanta, in other parts of the country, where these were not coming through the process the way the process is supposed to be operated, where election workers who understand the process and have been following the process for several days of counting suddenly were told to stand down. We're going to do something a little bit different here. What do you say about individuals who work at post offices who were told when they had ballots that would not make it to their destinations in time to be counted under state law to backdate? In other words, put a postal stamp on the outer envelope that says it was sent 2 or 3 days earlier, or that it was received, rather, 2 or 3 days earlier than it actually was. Because as you probably know under federal law, once you put your letter into the mailbox, that is considered sent, even if it isn't received by a postal facility for a day or two or whatever and doesn't get to your destination or to its destination for quite some time. A lot of things going on here that raise prima facie evidence, I would suggest, that something amiss took place. Do you know what probable cause is? In criminal law, there is a process referred to as probable cause. This is why we have grand juries. We present evidence to the grand jury to evaluate as to whether or not a crime was committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. Now, this is a criminal law standard, probable cause, right? And if they find that, they indict somebody. And that individual winds up having to be tried for the potential commission of a crime. Then the evidence has to be presented to the court of law, all right, and that process is something that's done before a jury of their peers. Grand juries are not the determinators of guilt or innocence. They simply conclude that evidence enough exists to indict someone for the commission of a crime. Substantial evidence. I'm not talking about frivolous stuff. Now, some of the things that are being claimed clearly are not going to be proven. And if that's the case, the mere allegation by itself is not the equivalent of fact, not the equivalent of proof at all. It requires something else. But there's a lot of corroborating evidence on a number of the claims that are being made by these witnesses who have submitted sworn affidavits. And that part is very, very deeply concerning to me. Suggests that some massive skullduggery in some cases, was afoot. Let's take another time out, and we'll come back with some conclusory thoughts.
Hi, Larry Myers again at River Ridge Hardware. Back in our garden center. It's changed a little bit. We have lots of greenery though. We have Christmas trees at $39.99. We have pretty much everything you'd ever want in Christmas. The icicle lights from white to straight blue to multicolor. I have these cute little shelf snowmen. One of the cool things that we have at River Ridge Hardware, which maybe one other in the United States, is a full custom picture framing shop and all kinds of Christmas decor that you can decorate your tree. Go on our website at riverridgehardware.com. Feel free to call us at 509-328-0915. We're still offering curbside delivery and delivery outside the neighborhood within a 5-mile radius with just a purchase of $25 or more. So let us help you in this shopping time. Shop local, shop often, and have a Merry Christmas.
Hey, Mike. I got a question.
Welcome back.
I got a question from somebody in chat.
All right.
It is from Stephen Major, who is a sponsor. He says, his question is this. Even though it's evident that there was some irregularities in this election and some fraud proven, was it really enough if those votes were discounted to turn the tide in Trump's favor? As for now, it appears Biden won by a huge margin of 6+ million votes.
Well, the question is how many ballots were tainted ballots that would be thrown out? That's the real issue, right? If a practice exists and you can prove there was a practice, then the only way in which you can substantiate whether or not that practice amounted to enough ballots to overturn an election in any state or any precinct or any community is to do an audit. And that's what would be necessary to do an audit. And this is exactly what the Democrats are fighting. They don't want an audit. Because if there is an audit and it proves the facts, then those electoral votes in that particular state would have to be removed. They wouldn't be given to Trump. They'd have to be removed unless, in the process of the audit, they showed that Trump actually won that state, right? But what happens is it's going to throw the integrity of the election into such question that maybe it would be better that the election were suspended in that particular state and neither one of the candidates gets the electoral votes. And then we come to where we're at a loggerhead unless someone has more than 270 electoral votes, in which case it goes to the House of Representatives. And if it goes to the House of Representatives, then each state has one vote. And the Democrats certainly don't want that to happen because they know that there are more Republican states than Democratic states. It has nothing to do with how many representatives there are. California, which has a huge population, would have the same number of votes under these circumstances as would Wyoming or Idaho or Montana, or Rhode Island. So that's the way this situation works. What would happen is that the audit would be the only way to prove it. It'd be the only way to absolutely prove it. But if you could say that you witnessed a truckload of ballots come in, and you don't know how many ballots those were, but you have corroborating evidence that that truckload of ballots was certainly illegal, one has to ask then how many ballots were there. The only way to prove that is to do an audit, and the process is a painstaking process. I mean, the bottom line on this is that it would probably go beyond the 13th of December when the Electoral College meets to elect the President of the United States. It might go well beyond that. But what if this investigation continues, and it will, and we come to the conclusion, guess what? We install Biden as President of the United States. And then months from now, a year from now or more, we discovered that the whole thing was fraudulent and he never really was elected. What do? Throws it into a serious constitutional question. Now, in the state of Pennsylvania, We have a situation where the Secretary of State of that state actually interfered with the election. The legislature was the only power to make any changes to the election rules, and the Secretary of State made changes to the elections rules. That one, I believe, has the best chance of going to the United States Supreme Court. And if it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, going with it will be a lot of these other concerns and complaints. And there may be some requirement that lower courts take a look at it and try it on the merits. This isn't over yet, and I know that there's an anxiety to get it over with, but the bottom line is, how can we be complacent that our elections are at all worthy of our belief in their integrity if this kind of skullduggery is going on? And by the way, some of these cities, Philadelphia, Chicago, Atlanta, Detroit, are famous for election fraud. I didn't believe a few weeks ago, and I still don't, that the president's going to prevail in this process, that there is a sufficient amount of legal cannon fodder, if you will, to reverse the outcome of the election. But stop and think. Joe Biden received 10 million more votes than did Barack Obama. Barack Obama got 65 million plus in 2008. That was his highest vote count. The President Trump received 10 million more votes than he received in 2016. In the down ballot, Republicans won virtually every seat they contested for the House of Representatives. They won almost every legislative seat in those 7 states that are considered the battleground states. Virtually, Republicans won everywhere except for the White House. Everywhere. What are the odds, just statistically? We have statisticians who look at that and say, you know what? The odds are astronomical that such an outcome could occur. If they won that much on the down ballot, the president would have won too. How come he didn't? Now, that's not evidence, but in the court of public opinion, that's sufficient evidence to suggest that trusting election outcomes might not be as easy to do after this election than it was before. In any event, we'll wait to see what happens. And it's not over even when the inauguration occurs. If that kind of cheating took place at that level and magnitude, American people must demand that these elections be cleaned up, or we can't trust who we vote for anymore. And I mentioned a time before, Joseph Stalin is credited with saying that it isn't who votes that counts. It's who counts the votes that counts. And that's true, and it may be prophetic in this particular case. I don't believe this election was fair, and I don't believe this election was not seriously impaired by fraud. But whether or not that's going to change the outcome, I have doubts that it will. Anyway, we've run out of time. I appreciate it. Thanks for the call. And by the way, Stephen Major is our underwriting sponsor, and we appreciate his support for this program. Absolutely do. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and I'll see you on the 17th of December for another edition of For Critical Thinking.